We are live. We are live. Jessica, we are live. A very good evening to everyone that is tuning in and watching us from the Facebook page, the Wesley USA. We are back again on this beautiful Tuesday, the 26th of October in the year 2021. As you know that Begeli Bege, if we have these conversations that are very informative and very profound. And today we are having another conversation on our topic, African theology and spirituality. For someone who's hearing this topic, the topic might sound familiar. And I have to say that this is the second time we are having this conversation here. It is part 2 of the conversation that we once had on the Wesley USA. And today we are continuing with that conversation. My name is Ukim D. But I'm coming to you live Apage Mtata, and I do have as my guest today Raphahlela.
Right, thank you. Good evening, Kim. It's good to be on this platform again.
Okay, thank you so much, Rev. When I was told about this session today, and I was like, wow, God, because I still have flashbacks of the part 1 that we had here, and the feedback I got after that, like people were saying this is so profound. This was very informative, and that developed an interest that I'm looking forward on your presentation today that you're going to make as we continue with our topic, African theology and spirituality. Just to remind people that they can be part of the conversation on our Facebook page, the Wesley USA, on the comment section there. You leave your comment there, you leave your question, whatever thing that you feel like you want to say as the presentation will be proceeding. So you can leave your comment there and we'll go through to those at a later stage. Call everyone, ubanikeze location, ubachazela ukuthi we are here. The Wesley USA is back now. Let us open now this conversation with prayer before we do anything. Let us close our eyes and pray. Father God, at this moment, at this hour, Thixo wethu olungileyo, ndisondela kuwe. Ndibulela Nkosi amandla akho, Thixo wam olungileyo, uthando lwakho, Thixo wethu ebeluye lahamba kunye nathi. We are grateful and thankful, God, for the love, Thixo wethu, that you have shared with us. Your love, Thixo wethu namandla, esenzela izinto, Thixo wethu ngale mina namhlanje. Sazibona Nkosi as this day ibiqhuba, Thixo wethu olungileyo. Sazibona Nkosi si-exista, Thixo wethu namandla, moving and walking, Thixo wethu olungileyo, in the boundaries of your love. Thixo wethu onamandla makhulu. And Thixo wethu onamandla, I can see uPaulus, Thixo wethu, as we were moving and walking, Thixo wethu onamandla, in the boundaries of your love, Thixo wethu onamandla. Kwathi kwimicelimngeni ebesijongene nayo namhlanje, ayabi nakusenza nto, Thixo wethu onamandla, ngenxa yothando lwakho, Thixo wethu olungileyo. Damva Thixo wethu onamandla, umkiliki ebuza umbuzo, Thixo wethu olungileyo kokuba Nkosi, xa kunje kanye Thixo wethu ebantwini bakho, Thixo wethu onamandla, yintoni na Thixo enokusahlula eluthandweni lakho, Thixo wethu onamandla. If Thixo wethu onamandla, when we move, when we walk, Thixo wethu onamandla, when we sit, Thixo wethu onamandla, we do that in the boundaries of your love, Thixo wethu onamandla. What then can separate us from your love, Thixo wethu onamandla? Ngoba yintoni Thixo wethu onamandla enawo amandla ukusahlula, Thixo wethu onamandla eluthandweni lakho, Thixo wethu onamandla. And Thixo wethu kumnandi, Thixo wethu onamandla, when we know that, Thixo wethu onamandla, it is not only your love, Thixo wethu onamandla, esihamba phakathi kwayo, Thixo wethu olungileyo, but Thixo wethu sazi wena ukuthi Thixo ukwalulo nothando, Thixo wethu onamandla, you are the love, Thixo wethu onamandla. Wangangosi, as we are about to start this conversation, Thixo wethu olungileyo, you can share with us your love, Thixo wethu onamandla. You can share without yourself, Thixo wethu olungileyo, usipho lothando, Thixo wethu onamandla, ngomphefumlo nangengqondo, Thixo wethu onamandla, nangamandla ethu onke, Thixo wethu olungileyo. As we are about to start this conversation, Thixo wethu onamandla, siniko lothando lwakho, Thixo wethu onamandla, sinike ezo zibele zakho, Thixo wethu, zihlale phezu kwethu, Thixo wethu onamandla, ukwenzela ukuthi this conversation, Thixo wethu onamandla, idrive luthando lwakho nenceba kunye nobabalo lwakho, Thixo wethu. Nanku umfundisi, Thixo wethu onamandla, as he will be making a presentation, Thixo wethu onamandla, mphokozele, Thixo wethu onamandla, umthi fafa ngolo thando lwakho. And not only him, Thixo wethu onamandla, but even the people that will be listening the presentation, banike Thixo wethu lothando lwakho, unikeze wonke umuntu Thixo wethu uthando lwakho lugqithe konke ukuqonda, uze ukuthi ke kosekugqibeleni Thixo wethu onamandla usigcine usifihle phansi kwelo phiko lakho elikhulu ngoku nangonaphakade. Amen. With that being said, we won't waste any time. We'll be handing over to you, Rev, to make your presentation. Just to remind people that this is part 2. This is a continuation of a conversation we once had before, a conversation about African theology and spirituality. And also, people, you can be part of the conversation on our Facebook page in the comment section. You leave your comment there, you leave your question there, and we will attend to those at a later stage. But for now, let us hand over to you, Rev Raphahlela. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me, Kim?
Yes, I can hear you, Rev. I can hear you.
Do you want me to start?
Yes, you can start, Rev.
Right, thank you. And it's good for you to have me tonight on the part 2 of African theology and spirituality. And the last time we looked at how it developed, the origins, part of the origin and the cosmologies. But tonight I would like to take this time to say to us, let us take a deep dive into the origins of the African theology and spirituality, focusing much on the key elements for us to better locate this theology in its right place. And when one follows the written records and recordings of science and culture, one comes across very key elements that brings a lot of light to a number of issues relating to African theology and spirituality. And the research methodology for this kind of work relies mostly on three levels of research domains. The first being the public domain source, which is the information that is easily found and made available to the public. Two, it's a little bit deeper one, the private domain source, which you find mainly with private data collectors, those who collect data and when they pass on, they either sell it to the museum or to the next person in the family. That is your private domain source. And the third source is the primordial domain source. This kind of source looks into nature or creation as a teacher. And these are the three levels of research that we do in African theology and spirituality. Sorry. And we all know for now that there is only one race in the world, and that is the human race. And we know that all humanity or all life originated in the continent of Africa. That is, humanity is born in Africa. The development of the human family in Africa happened over many million years. Many million years. And the basic model of humanity is patterned clearly on the African model. The abundance of archaeological records report that no skeletal remains older than 5,000 years can be found outside of Africa, but multiple records of humanoid remains in Africa, they date back over 4 million years, and that's a very long time. And this leads us to what is commonly known by the scientists as the Laetoli footprints, which were found or preserved in a volcanic ash floor dating back to between 9 and 12 million years. And these Laetoli footprints are located in that place called the Olduvai in northern Tanzania. And friends and family, this is a very long history of humanity, a very long historical records of humanity. But for the sake of our work tonight on the
Are you there, Rev? I think we are experiencing a bit of a technical problem this side. It seems like we have lost Rev. Rev, are you there? Just to remind people that we are having a conversation on African theology and spirituality. And this is part 2 of the conversation. We once had this conversation before, and Rev Raphahlela now was continuing with the presentation. Rev, are you there?
Yes, I'm back. I'm sorry for the connectivity challenges. I was looking at, we must now take a look at what brought about the different thoughts or different ideas to the understanding of who God is and why. And family, this brings us to what scientists call the ice age or ice periods. We are reliably informed that there were 4 ice periods, and this is where the rubber hits the road or the toe hits the footpath. As we all know that science is the realm of evidence, and African theology, as we said the last time, is knowledge-based, is high knowledge. Facts and truth without evidence in this area or in this realm does not count. Those early Africans, their nature or their makeup was to move in the spirit of exploring and transforming the world. And as they moved up in the northern hemisphere, the climate changed with the beginning of the ice periods, what is commonly known as the glacial and interglacial periods. The only safe place to make life was to seek shelter in the mountains or in caves. And scholars relate a very in-depth scientific findings from the absence of the sun or the sunlight and its impact on the skin, the eyes, and the facial morphology. Simply put, scholars say, and I like this, black skin in an ice age of the northern environment would become a liability rather than an asset from an evolutionary perspective. And they state or cite some examples that in an environment of the scorching sun, the nose becomes big, yes, big, with wide enough nostrils to take in more oxygen or air into the brain and into the entire body. But in the ice age, a big nose is not helpful, as the air is too cold to be taken in. Hence, facial morphology happened for the nose to grow in height, to prolong the nostrils, to warm up the cold air that comes through the nostrils. The eye also followed the climate condition to turn into blue or a blue color. In a hot climate, scientists explain how oils in the human hair will be coily and to regulate the heat of the sun. In an ice age, how these oils will grow the hair long to protect the neck and allow brain signals to move through to the organs of the body. And all this, my dear friends, is supported by scientific evidence. And I don't want to bore you with scientific evidence. We are looking at the origin of African theology and spirituality. But when you look into food production during the Ice Age, food production and security could only be done during very short periods of interglacial, when the ice had subsided a little bit, 3 months or so, and back into the caves people went, and that was not enough time to secure food. And this is a period where your neighbor, and this is very interesting for me, this is a period where your neighbor could look at you as a possible meal or a possible next meal. And when you move away from food productions and you look into cultural development during the Ice Age, people became too individualistic. Community building was not possible. And the left brain, we know that the left brain works hand in glove with the right brain. But during the Ice Age, the left brain, as we know it, is very analytical, individualistic, intellectual, as opposed to the right brain, which brings things together, it synthesizes, it builds community, it brings things together. But those Africans who were trapped in the Ice Age lost much of the right brain. And we all know that if you don't use part of the body like muscles, you lose it. So during the Ice Age period, people began to develop competition. They became highly competitive and highly aggressive because on issues of food and securing food and being afraid that my neighbor would take me for the next meal. Culture of taking what belongs to the neighbor for survival developed very rapidly. Culture of domination, we see it developing during the Ice Age. And we know that domination goes along with military invasion or military conquest. And this is where we begin to see the idea of conquering other nations and taking what they belong because of the culture that developed in the caves during the ice period. And nature preservation was not learned enough during the Ice Age. And hence we see how people after the Ice Age have dealt with nature. But what is core this evening is that during the Ice Age, what kind of a picture of God was developed? What kind of a picture was developed by those who were caught in the Ice Age? And remember, my dear friends, one thing that I forgot was to mention that it was not only the facial morphology that happened, not only the eyes that turned blue, but with the absence of the sun, scientists will take you step by step explaining how people lost their black pigmentation, what is called the melanin. Hence I said that the black color was a liability during the time. But back to the concept of the development of the God picture. What developed in there was a God who will save you from your neighbor. A God who will take other people's land and give it away to you as an inheritance. That concept developed during the Ice Age. You know, people had a picture of a God who is jealous, a God who operates on racial lines. Doctrines developed, a doctrine of election of certain people over others developed. Doctrines that undermined other people's cultures developed. And you can see how this thing had developed. But when we look into the Africans who were enjoying the sunlight on the continent of Africa, who were not touched by this Ice Age, they had a different picture of God. And this is where the origins of this theology came. Africans have had a different picture of God, a communal God who cares for your neighbor. They saw themselves as spiritual beings in a physical body. They saw themselves as people who were made by God to become speech masters, that they should develop speech, begin languages, and writing systems. They saw themselves, you know, as people who God gave a creative mind to bring about civilizations. Their picture of God helped them to see themselves and identify a spirit of community, developed community spiritual systems, And I wish to pause a little bit here and say, in Africa antiquity, and some of us had a taste of that when we grew up, to say you come into a village, a divinity was in the homestead. You know, I remember when I came into my granny's place in the village, coming from the urban area, the first place that we will go to was the divinity in the home, where they will say to those who have gone before us, our ancestors, to say to them, the children are back home. And they would then slaughter and have a jubilation. What I'm trying to say that divinities were kept in different families. Even when a stranger came to your family, he would greet. And as we know that in the homestead, the home would be very deep in the yard, far from the gate. And when people came through the gate, they would begin to greet, pay homage from the gate, because they are coming into the divinity of a home. And each and every home had that shrine where they practiced the divinity, Epland, if you like it. And as each and every homestead had its own divinity, even young boys, you know, when they begin to date, they would not take those that they date to the home, because that was a divine place. You know, even when there are feasts at home and young boys would begin a fight, people would tell you, don't beat a person in a homestead. That's divine. And we see that moving out of the home into a central place with a non-African theology. And I'll come to that in a moment. We see this African theology developing for a respect for nature, respect for other people, respect for property. And this came to these Africans to become devotees of the spiritual world. They understood that being in relation to the animals, the trees, the insects, and everything around them was paying homage to the divine creator. And they developed spiritual systems where they would manage themselves through making some certain rituals that would ensure that they are in harmony with the neighbor, in harmony with the animals, in harmony with all creation, because they looked at the interconnectedness of creation, that we are the children of the universe, no less than the trees and the stars. And they focused, they had time to study and observe and watch the stars and the moon, and begin to study them and say, how does the celestial body have control over us? And how do we on earth respond to the celestial body? And these are the issues that African theology deals with. African theology by that time created or built people who were very compassionate to take care of fellow human beings and to become freedom seekers. And you can see, Brother Kim, how deep this African theology was. And challenges were born when those who were in the ice period or in the ice age began wars of invasion or colonization on the African continent. And that's where we saw and witnessed the picture of God that was developed during the ice age, and the picture of God that was here on the continent of Africa. And in our last presentation, I tried to unpack the cosmology of those who understood who God is in Africa. And when you look into the period of colonization, when the clash happened, those who were in the Ice Age, who have lost the skin color, who have developed a different nose, developed a different, you hear what I'm saying, brought their culture of invasion and military wars and stuff and begin to conquer. They corrupted. What is very key is that people need to understand. I know that we don't have much time on this, but if you allow me, those who came in, they didn't have enough time in the Ice Age to develop a very strong theology. And as they came into contact with those who were on the African continent, who had developed their African theology, they began to copy what they saw, because they brought explorers, archaeologists, you name it, to come and explore and study those who were on the African continent. And they began to copy. And scholars put it very clearly, Brother Kim, that the concept of Christianity began in Africa. Christianity with a K. Because those who were on the African continent had time to say, this God who created us in his own image and his own likeness has deposited or infused in us his spirit. And they called that spirit the Christ, the KRT. They didn't use vowels by that time. And they said, if you are experiencing storms in your life, you need to go back and shake your Christ, your Christ in. Shake him. And remember the story in Mark 4, when there were storms at sea. And that is an African story to say your Christ or your Christ is not externally based, but is internally. And that is an African theology that says, wake that person up, and we see how the Greco-Roman took that away and take it into the Greco-Roman world and brought it back to us, the very same thing, as a tool of controlling people psychologically, because controlling people militarily is very expensive. So they took what belongs to us, corrupted it, and brought it back. Like I said in the last presentation, that the Christ that was brought by the Greco-Roman who was crucified on the cross, it is the Son, the S-U-N, because during the 21st of December to the 24th, the sun stands still as if it is dead. And it is during that time when it is called a very high holy moment in African theology. Then on the 25th of December, when the sun starts to move, that was regarded as a Christ Mass. Mass meaning the born. That Christ within you is born again, and I can go very deep into that. But the point that I'm trying to make is what had originally belonged to us. And you find it as you do your own research, that the Greco-Roman or the modern Christianity as we have it, it's a late comer to the Christianity with a K, Christianity that was there in Africa before. And how has that become a religion of high praise but low productivity? You look into our country, South Africa. The last time I checked the statistics, Christians are more than 70 to 80%. But you look into into the international charts, you look into charts of crime, human trafficking, all that, corruption, it happens within this 80%. But when you look back over the 2,000 years that we have experienced this kind of Christianity, when you look back into 6,000, 30,000 or 10,000 years back, you'll find that those Africans had developed governance. And I want you to listen carefully. Because of the Christianity that they followed, the spiritual systems that they followed, that each and every member of the community had to do every night before he or she goes to sleep, had to do a declaration of innocence, to say, during the day, I didn't steal, I didn't waste water, I didn't waste nature, I took care of the animals, I didn't molest a child, I. And they will go and sleep. And in the morning, each and every member of the community will say, thanks to the sun that's come back, the only Son of God who can walk on the water every morning. And they will say, I will not waste water. I will not do this. I will not do that. And you know, when you do your own research, you'll find that for many years before the invasion, those people ruled Kemet, the Black Land, without police force, without prisons, because they were highly spiritual. And if you look into the history of policing, who is the father of policing, you'll find that it comes in the West. It is not an African concept. Africans believed and trusted in their belief, in their spiritual systems that had made them to be successful. And tonight, I just wanted to give you that, that understanding of where do we come from as Africans with African theology. And today, as we find ourselves at some kind of a crossroad, we need to look into who are we, where do we come from, what are our own spiritual systems that has brought us this far. I'm not sure if your audience have questions or you personally have questions before I go on.
I'm trying to check that, Rev, from Facebook, but I do have questions. But I'd love to check on Facebook if there are any questions, so that I can start with them. But it seems like people are amazed by this presentation, because abanye bayakhala, you know, the revelations that they are getting from your presentation. Well, I think I've got only 3 questions. You did mention in the beginning of your presentation about the domains or the sources. I didn't capture them well, but I did capture the public domain source and the private domain source. And you mentioned that the public domain source, like, it is those that are more accessible to everyone, and then the private one are those that are not accessible to everyone. And then there is the third one, which is I didn't capture the name very well, but I wanted to ask a question on with this information, you know, that has got these divisions, you know, in terms of availability. How does it play an influence in terms of, like, people understanding African theology and spirituality, when there will be, like, information that will be available to everyone, and there is information that is not available to everyone? Now, what effect does that have, you know, in African people understanding the African theology and spirituality? That is the first question that I have. And the second question is, you mentioned on the Ice Age that it is where like people now had a different understanding and perception about God, and others view God in a different way. But I was more interested in how Africans saw or perceived God during that era of the Ice Age, and looking at how, like, when you shared with us that Africans see God as a communal and all that you have mentioned, how is that God whom Africans perceived during the Ice Age different from the God that is presented to us in scriptures? That is the second question that I am having. And also a follow-up question to the second question is, the way we perceived God, how has it been a problem to Africans? Because you mentioned that some view God, theft and all that, and now we understand our God as this God who is communal, of which others understand him in a different way. So does our understanding of God, has it became a problem for us? If it did? And the last one is, I love this revelation that you gave us about Christians back then who would make this declaration of innocence, and I think it's a shame having Christians who are 80% of a population, and then we experience social ills like corruptions, crime, and all that. Meaning that if you can look at corruption, a percentage of people that commit corruption are people that are Christians, and if you can look at crime, same thing it goes. So what corrupted Christianity today? Because back then it seems like it was something that was not corrupted as it is today. For now, indonje elula, I don't want to use the word, but I can say, I don't mean to offend anyone, but ingathi kukhona nemigulukudu, within Christianity. What corrupted Christianity from what it was before?
All right. No, thank you, Brother Kim. Let me explain I said the first research, let me explain the domain sources, the research domain sources. The first one is the public domain source. This is the information that is easily available. When you do research, you find it in the public, Then you have the private domain source. These are resources. To give you an example, those early Africans in Kemet, those Africans in antiquity, they wrote, like for instance, the medical papyrus, the medical document, a mathematical document, that they had worked out. But when you trace them today, those documents, you will find them in the British Museum. And other many artifacts. I mean, when you read newspapers or you listen to news, African countries are fighting today for those artifacts that were removed from the African continent. You find them in the museums in the world, the British Museum being the biggest. And you will find that some of the diaries of people like Greenberg, and remember Greenberg was the person who clustered languages in Africa, who said This group is one group, and that group is the Luba, the Chuluba, the Yoruba. He said these are the one, like that. And this is also when you go to the 1844, the Berlin conference that divided Africa into these countries that we have today. You go into those archives of private domain sources, because these people, when they were in the African continent, they had diaries. They wrote everything that they saw. Your Vasco da Gamas, your Marco Polos, the list is endless. Your Greenberg, and the list is endless. So when you go to museums and other places where this information is kept, then you are exposed to the private domain source. Are you with me? Then the last domain source is the primordial. The primordial looks into nature. How does nature respond to the subject that you are dealing with? For instance, when you look into the skin, for it to change from being black to white in the ice, and scientists will tell you that nature doesn't allow this. Your black skin is it's a liability in a very cold area. It's not helpful, and they look into those things. Your vitamin D's, all those things, your cholesterols and all those oils, which is part of the primordial. How does it then react? That was the question on the research domains. The second one was, what effect does that have here? You said, what effect, if I wrote it correctly, your second question was on, come again, Kim, you remember the second question?
The second question was on how, like, the Africans during the Ice Age perceived God,
okay,
as
thank
being.
You.
Yes.
Remember that all people, when we deal with the picture of God, we start with creation stories, which are highly, they are mythology, And in the Bible, we have Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. And those are two different stories of creation. But they are very important because they tell us, they give us a picture of those communities that developed those two stories. They give you a picture of the kind of God that they know. Now, when you are in the ice, trapped in the ice, you don't see your neighbor. The only time you see your neighbor is when your neighbor wants to catch you and eat you, or when your neighbor wants to come and steal food from you. You see? So there is no community. And in that ice age of individual people, which is highly individualistic, the picture of God that they had, was a God that I explained, who will defend you from your neighbor, who will help you to take away the land of your neighbor, to dominate your neighbor so that you can survive. You see? As compared to those who were in the African continent who were not that affected by the ice, they enjoyed the sun, and they knew that when a mango tree gives you mangoes and a mango fall from a tree, they knew that another mango will come. And as mangoes fall down, I'm making an example, they would share because they were not afraid of each other. And what is important is you look at the kind of communal work that they did. They built pyramids high mathematics. They understood stars as community, as watchers and recorders. They created governments. Are you with me? Because they had a picture of a God who is very loving, who is very communal, who is very blessing to a community, and who has given each one enough. And hence, when they did their declaration of innocence every night, they would go there and say, during the day, I only had a fair share for me. And when I chopped down a tree, they would pray to the world of the spirits to say, I'm only taking what I need and I will replace later. And they knew that the universe, because they were children of the universe, they knew that they are part of it. And the universe enjoys action, because for every action, there is reaction. So if you hurt animals, you will be hurt back. If you hurt the trees, the same will come to you. Say they created a spiritual system that will sustain them as a community, not only of human, but a community that is in creation. And they took care of the rivers. They took care of the forest. They took care of everything, because they had a picture of that kind of God, who is a God, like Psalm 24 puts it, everything belongs to God. God is the, So you can see that their understanding of God, these two, those who were caught up in the eyes and those ones who were enjoying the sun, their development of God, the picture of God is different. And your other question was, how different then is the God that we read about in the Bible? And remember that each and every text depends on how you interpret it. The interpretation of a text. You read a text, you interpret it in your own way. I read a text, I interpret it in my own way. Because I've been following the work done by Baba Ashra Kwezi, and who will tell you all the stories in the Bible, that these are African stories that are there in the Bible. And he can join story by story, the story of Noah, the story of Moses, the story of the Bible. You follow his work as he interprets these things, and he shows you that they are still written even today on stone in Kemet, to say the history of baptism. He can show you on the walls in Egypt, because that is an African concept. So it depends on how do you interpret the scriptures and who teaches you to interpret the scriptures. The other one is on the economic systems. You look into those people's economic systems. An economic system cannot be in place if there is no good interrelationship between people. You don't need money, is what money is, but money is not an economic system. You can have your money, lots of it, but if you are not in good talking terms with your neighbor who sells cabbages and onions, where will you find your cabbage and onion? Are you with me? The most example that comes to mind, you need to look into what the Basotho called a Mafisa economy, because the capital didn't lie with individuals, but the capital lied in the clan under Inkos. And for you to prove that you are a member of that clan, you must uzi chondota, utungubani, uzalwa ngubani. How are you related to the clan? How do you take part in the inheritance of the clan? That will lie in you knowing who you are. And if you have not gone through the initiation school in your tribe, You know, like for instance, in my tribe, there are 3 initiation schools. When you are still a small boy, when you are in middle age, and when you become a young adult, you learn the secrets and the praises, izituko, of that clan. So that when you come into the clan, when you enter, uyazisho ukuthi ungubani, uzalwa ngubani, unyana kabani. How do you relate to this clan? Because the capital belonged to the clan, not to the individual. But in the capitalistic system, where you find a God who is jealous, who is individualistic, few individuals. I mean, in South Africa, they tell us there are only 4 or 5 families that have the whole capital of this country. Can you see that? I think I've answered your economic system.
Yes,
it's that 80% of the population, you find this social ills of crime and corruption. And when I responded to that in my presentation, I said, we are stuck with a corrupted Christianity as compared to the old one that our forebears had, you know, which carried them. And I said, the one that we're having now is a Christianity of high praise, but low productivity.
Low productivity, yes.
When it comes to what are the fruits of this Christianity that we are following now, you find that there is high crime, high corruption, one commission to another commission. You know, even the police system that we have today does no longer serve us, because you can't put a policeman or a woman in every corner, even in the bedroom, and in every corner of the street and in every shop, because that is a spiritual issue. And I listen to people who saying economic freedom in our lifetime. It's good and well, but spirituality first. How do we relate to each other? How do we relate to the resources? How do we relate to God? How do we relate to minerals? How do we relate to gold and diamond and all that? Do we take that as a community, or is it an individualistic thing? And this is where I think African spirituality and African theology can take us back into the right place of umuntu, ngumuntu, ngabantu.
Yes. Right. Right, Rev. I've got 2 last questions before I give you to proceed with your presentation. Usonobile Nkwali has got 2 questions here. Another insightful, spiritually stimulating presentation. And then there are these 2 questions. The first question is, can the religion with high praise and low productivity be salvaged from the lingering inhuman theology of Ice Age now that it is back in Africa? And the second question is, some have said that the KRT or Christ is problematic in understanding spirituality of African theology. Do you think the talk of KRT today will be of assistance? Those are the 2 questions that we have on Facebook.
Yes, I've heard the KRT one. I missed the first one.
The first one is, can the religion with high praise and low productivity be salvaged from lingering inhuman theology of the Ice Age now that is back in Africa?
Yeah, let me start with the KRT. The KRT, as I said, there is a book or books, many of them, that can teach you of Christ before Christianity. And that needs to go into the schools, curriculum. You know, that's my own opinion, to say the Christ resides within you, and you need to be taught how to wake or to put that Christ to a process of awakening. Because for those early Africans, that KRT, the Christ, was the divine being in you, coming from the fact that we are made in the image and likeness of God. Just like I said the other day, that a drop of water of the ocean is not different from the ocean itself. If a drop of water in the ocean comes from the ocean, then the ocean and that drop of water have to have the same quantity and quality. They may differ in quantity, but they have the same quality. Are you with me?
Yes.
Now, if this God, according to the African theology, that says this omnipotent, this omniscient, and this omnipotent God, when he or she wanted to experience the God self, gave us a spark of himself or herself in us, so that we need to grow that spark, so that we must become, hence it says, I'm holy, and therefore you need to be holy. As a drop of you need to be like the ocean. And for the early Africans, that drop was that little Christ within you that you need to develop and allow it to grow and make you to be a person who respects others, to be a person who would respect property, to be a person who would live harmoniously in a community, not only in a community, but with God's creation as it is given to us. So that is the little spark, the Christ that I'm talking about. And when we come to the second question of high praise, low productivity, it has come with us. We have had religious leaders on the continent of Africa. They've always said, when the missionaries came into the continent of Africa, they brought the Bible and we had the land. And after the prayer, who had the land and who had the Bible? You see? So we need to go back there, you know, and work on these things and find a way, you know. Yes, sir.
All right. I think you can continue, Rev, with your presentation, and then if there are any other questions, we'll take them when you are done.
Okay, sir. So my continuation was to look into what I've recently came across from the Bassa people of Cameroon. They have the very same thing that the early Africans had, which they called the divine ma'at. You see, those were 42 admonitions, you know, 42 laws, if you like, or 42 affirmations that each and every member in the community needs to be taught those and practice them, because African theology has on the other side African spirituality, and African spirituality is highly practiced. You know, it's practice intensive. That's what I want to say. It's practice intensive. You don't go to a holy place on one day and you spend other 6 days out of it. With Africa, you take your spirituality everywhere where you go. And the last time I listened to your program, people were talking about black tax. And this is where you'd understand that living in a community, I'm responsible to you and you are responsible to me, without the idea of capitalism. Okay? And my other point was going to be on the development on the suffix of ntu, NTU. And here I'd follow that primordial thing and private collection resource domains. When you go to the university and they tell you that you need to do ontology, that ontology comes, the root, it is the word NTU, ntu, the being. And you can see it when Africans began, because they had the spirit of exploration and transformation. You walk through all of Africa, you follow the Bantu people, and you would see that in antiquity, they lived very harmoniously among each other because they were controlled by the Ntu, what the Sotho people call it the Tu, Mutu, Kimutu, Kabatu. And the Tu or the Ntu, it's not the flesh, but it is the spirit that brings people together. And you only find that embedded in African theology and African spirituality. You find it there. These are the key things. And if I may recommend the book, which was published now in July, it is the book by Professor Chilemalema, Mukenge. He comes from he's a retired professor in the US, but he comes from the DRC Congo, who will take you through this thing. And I compared him with another professor in Cameroon who was talking about the MBOG, the Mbok, to say the people in Cameroon are controlled by the Mbok, which brings the community together, you know. And the most unfortunate thing is that what I call the ECC, the Euro-Christian colonization, has eroded that African theology and that African spirituality. And hence we need to go back and recollect ourselves to build our communities. I want to thank you, sir.
Wow. Thank you for the. Oh, I'm saying thank you for the presentation. Oh, sorry, my mic was off. Thank you for that presentation. It was very informative and very profound. And I don't think we have much questions on our Facebook, but the compliments, like people complimenting the presentation, and some are quoting, you know, the things that you have said on Facebook. So I don't think there are any questions at the moment. I'm trying to check there is a comment that I want to read here. There is a comment from Unodi that I want to read from Facebook. All right. There is someone who said, can you please repeat the name of the book that you just mentioned? Uiphosile, the one by Mukenge.
Right. The The title of the book by Professor Chilemalema Mukenge, the title is Muntu wa Nzambi. Muntu wa Nzambi. You can find it with Amazon. With Amazon. That's where I found it. Muntu wa Nzambi. Thank you.
All right. There is a comment that I would love to read from Unoti. It reads as follows. I am amazed from this presentation. Big issues being not mentioning animals and their relationship as key in living. Maybe it's time, but I think so long as that I left for later. There is a smell of propagandist despite the scientific research. There is another comment from Unodi. I don't understand it very well. I don't know what we capture it from this, but it's not a question. You know,
can you repeat the propaganda?
Okay, Uti, there is a smell of a propagandist despite the scientific research. Should I read it Yonke or that line?
I think I get it, yeah. You see, the challenge is, I know that is not a question, but the challenge is, even myself, it took me long because I was taught and brought up in a certain way, which had conditioned my mind. And I fully understand when people are struggling with understanding this, and we only have an hour. It takes time to break. You know, it is easier to break the metal chain than to deal with the mental chain. It's very easy to break the metal chain than to break a mental chain. That will be my humble submission to that one.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes,
thank you, Rev. Yes, thank you, Rev. I think we're done, you know, because there are no questions. You know, people are very amazed by the presentation. What will be your what will be your concluding words before we close this session today that we're having?
You were in the process of reading the second comment.
Oh, there's no other comments. Just, you know, compliments, Rev. You know, people are saying,
okay, no, thank you.
Yes, just compliments.
Yes.
What will be your words of conclusion, you know, before we close this conversation that we are having today?
No, I would say thank you, Kim and the Wesley Guild SA platform, as I draw to a close for tonight. There's a lot of work. 500 years plus, and I repeat, 500 years plus of Euro-Christian colonization has conditioned the African mind to see itself as inferior. And you know, I think it's Joel Baker who says people have paradigms, and when your paradigm becomes a paradigm effect, it can lead you to a paradigm paralysis, where you have been paralyzed by the same idea. And where we need to move to is to become paradigm pioneers. And to become a paradigm pioneer, you are expected to shift ideas and traditions and structures that has kept people for a very long time. And 500 years has concretized some of the ideas, some of the traditions, and some of the structures. And it took me long to understand. If I close, you need to ask Umama, Professor Nokuzola Mdende. I met her in my young age, and she was presenting on the African traditional religion. And because I was still fully conditioned with the Euro-Christian colonization, I didn't take her serious up until I met her many, many years after we first met when I was a probationer. And today she looks at me and says, "My son, I told you you're on the wrong path." But I want to close with those words and say thank you very much, Brother Kim, and all your audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rev, for your time. And Sibuleta Kubandu that were watching us, and those who partake in the conversation with the questions, the comments, and the compliments. Well, thank you so much. It is now time for us to leave. And with that being said, to everyone, goodbye. See you some other time. Thank you.